Hi everyone, welcome to Postgraduate Psychology. So thanks for joining us for this session. This session's a question and answer session. We're going to ask a few of the commonly asked questions about postgraduate psychology here at Macquarie, and then open up the floor to all of you guys so you can write in your questions and you can ask us here live. So any questions you have about postgraduate psychology, please feel free to write them in the website and our great team will be filling them on to us. So my name is Dr. Alyssa Beath. I'm the Undergraduate Director of the Department of Psychology here at Macquarie, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Associate Professor Joanne Earle, who is the Director of our Postgraduate Professional Psychology program. So Jo is a registered psychologist with the Australian Psychological Society, and she also has an endorsement in the area of organisational psychology. Jo has a great expertise in terms of directing various psychology postgraduate programs across the last 14 years, and she is our absolute expert about postgraduate psychology. Hi Jo.
Hi, thanks very much for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be able to speak to people, and for everyone at home watching, thank you so much for making time on Saturday to join us today.
So we're going to kick off with a few questions that are common questions that we get asked about postgraduate psychology, and then open it up to the floor to all the questions that you guys might have. So Jo, very first one we have here, what is the pathway to becoming a registered or practicing psychologist?
Sure, it's a very common question and it's quite complicated, so I'm going to break it down for you. Very first thing you need is a good honours degree or equivalent, so at least a 2-1 honours degree. Once you've completed your honours, then you need to enrol in postgraduate training of some sort. Now, we're very fortunate here at Macquarie to have two different types of pathways into postgraduate psychology. So we have 2-year programs, and they'll lead to endorsement in clinical neuropsychology and organisational psychology. We also have a 1-year program which will allow you to become a generalist, and that's called the Masters of Professional Psychology. So quite a range of different options in terms of getting that postgraduate training that's necessary.
And it's great that it can suit students that have a variety of interests in psychology. So maybe we can start by talking a little bit about what the different types of psychology. So we've got 4 different programs here. We've got clinical psychology, clinical neuro, organisational psychology, and professional psychology. What's the difference between those 4?
Sure. So the 3 endorsed areas allow you to work in those areas as almost like a specialist, really. That's what they would refer to. Whereas the generalist pathway, that's the 5+1 program, allows you to work in a wide range of psychology, but you call yourself a generalist psychologist. So if you were going to be doing clinical psychology, you might be focusing on clinical care in a hospital or schools, or even in private clinics or private practice. If you were going to be an organisational psychologist, you might be working with big organisations or with big consulting companies, and you'd be doing training and development, recruitment and selection, organisational development, those types of things. And then if you were doing clinical neuropsych, well, it's pretty obvious what that's about. That's about the brain, and you'd be working in maybe a tertiary referral hospital. You could be working in a brain injury unit or a psychiatric hospital or rehabilitation. So wide variety of different areas there. Majority of the workforce, though, in Australia for a generalist psychologist is in the generalist role. So about 60% of people that train as psychologists are referring to themselves as generalists.
And that's the registered psychologist?
Yeah, that's a registered psychologist, but without an area of endorsement.
Great. So what is the difference between the different areas of specialisation in terms of the kinds of work that people could be doing? Yeah,
so we often get the question about what's the difference between maybe a generalist psychologist and then a clinical psychologist, because they're 2 of the groups that are best known. And I guess the key difference is training, levels of training, the rate of pay that you can charge, and then also the other area is the type of work that you'll do. So let me take you through those. So for example, with clinical, you'll do 2 years training and then 2 years supervision to call yourself a clinical psych. If you're a generalist psych, then you would do the 1-year training course and then a 1-year internship. Secondly, in terms of rates of pay vary a little bit. If you're a clinical psychologist, then you would be most likely to get a little bit more for Medicare clients per hour. And then lastly, the sort of work that you do. So if you're a clinical psychologist and you've been endorsed in any area, then you're most likely to be working with fairly complex cases, diagnosis and assessment, and then therapeutic interventions. So, matching the area of specialisation that you've done extra training in.
Mm-hmm. Great. So for our students that might be interested in master's programs, you mentioned before about needing an honours degree in psychology.
Yeah.
How else do students get entry into the master's programs, or what is required in terms of getting entry into the programs?
Sure. So there's a 3-step process for application. The first step is you go to UAC and register with UAC. Then you complete our supplementary form, and then the third step is getting 2 referees that's loaded into a portal. What's important if you do that is to make sure that you've ticked the right box so that we can release the referrals back to the right program directors. So once you've done all of that, we have a look at all the applications that have come in. We shortlist the applications. We make decisions about who we want to come into the next stage. If you're interested in clinical neuropsych, you're most likely to come in for an interview. If you're interested in the other programs, then we have a process that's like an assessment centre. We call it mini multiple interviews. And you'll come in and meet a variety of different people that are associated with the program, and they'll ask you questions. But that gives you some really good insight to the sort of people that we're looking for as well. You get to meet the staff, you get to meet the other students that you might be spending time with as classmates. So it's a really good opportunity to come in. I guess, though, one of the other questions that sometimes people will ask me is, well, how do I improve my chances? What do I do to make sure that once I've been through this selection process that I can actually get selected? So the first thing is, I'd say, do your homework. It's really important, if you've applied for a course with an area of specialisation or endorsement, that you know what you're going to be doing, what sort of clients you might be working with, what sort of settings you might be working with. So do a bit of homework first.
And in terms of that homework, students can go to the Macquarie Psychology websites. They can also go to the Australian Psychological Society website, which has great information on a whole range of different professional programs.
It does. And it has a whole lot of information in there, even videos on what those different specialisations look like.
Right. So master's programs generally contain a few different components. They have some coursework units that students study at Macquarie University. They also have a research component and then a practical placement component. And that practical placement is really important for students to get actual practical hands-on experience for the kinds of work that they might be doing when they're actually working as a psychologist. Can you tell us a little bit more about what those placements entail? Sure.
So within the 2-year programs, there's 1,000 hours, which is quite a lot of practical experience. And in the 1-year program, we've got 300-hour placements. So in both cases, though, we try to match the placements that you do with where your areas of interest are. If you do the 2-year programs, you'll do between 3 and 4 different placements. You'll get to meet with different employers and different employment settings. And the first one of those is generally always in our clinic, which is fantastic. Our clinic on site looks like a medical centre. So you come in, there's a waiting room, there are staff, a receptionist, and then individual consulting rooms. So that's your first experience before you even need to step outside of the university. So that's very reassuring for a lot of students. And then the 300 hours is a placement that takes place out in the community. So those placements give you the opportunity to get a bit more of a taste of the sorts of things that I was describing before in terms of those different areas of endorsement. It gives students the opportunity to really get their hands into the area and hands-on learning before they go out to practice.
Get their hands in people's brains.
Well, yeah, maybe not. Hopefully not.
And students can take a range of different placements, and Macquarie University organises the placements for them.
Oh,
so
they
students
do.
Don't have to find them themselves.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of paperwork involved. And what's most important is that we get good supervisors, and that the supervisors are properly trained when we align them with one of our students. So we take care of all of that. We have a look at what you're interested in. We've got dedicated staff for each of the program. There's an individual staff member that just takes care of those placements for the students. So really that individual personalised care.
Absolutely, it's important.
Oh, I think it absolutely is, especially when students might now, if they're doing their honours, might be still suffering their way through their honours thesis and thinking, why did I choose this topic?
So a lot of support for students in terms of navigating the different elements of the master's programs.
Yeah.
So my next question for you, Jo, is what kind of jobs that students can get and how there might be connections between the kinds of placements that they have and the jobs they might get when they actually graduate from the degree.
Yeah, sure. I mean, employability is important, and we put a lot of emphasis on that to help students to make sure that they're properly, really well equipped when they leave here to go and be productive as a psychologist from their first day out. So one of the things that we try to do is to make sure that students are going into placements which will be relevant to the area that they want to work in. So most likely the areas that take you for placement will also be looking for people for employment. So this means that there's a good opportunity for students to be working on placement and then that convert to a full-time employment opportunity. That's the way that many of my students in the Masters of Professional Psychology have actually found work, and I know it's the case for the other programs as well. Yeah. So it's a real opportunity to try before you buy. Absolutely. From the student's perspective, but also from the employer's perspective as well. So lots of great experience.
Great. And our next question is about taking masters part-time. So there's a lot of workload involved in running a masters program. Yeah. Is there options for students to take masters part-time? Sure.
I mean, we assume that some of the students are going to need to study part-time. So we're fully equipped to be able to cope with that. We allow students to enrol part-time. We usually provide them with a bit of guidance too about what subjects to enrol in, so they're not trying to figure that out for themselves. In my program, for example, the Master of Professional Psychology, we've got workshops on a Wednesday and a Saturday. In fact, I've taken a quick break from one of my lectures to come and talk to students today.
Multitasking today.
Yeah, that's right, multitasking. So that's the program for the Master of Professional Psych, for Org Psych. They do all of their lectures in the evenings, for example. And so similarly, we try to make sure that there's good chunks of time available for students to go and do placements. It will take you longer, of course, though, if you study part-time. Roughly double the amount of time that it would take if you did it full-time.
All right, great. So now I think we're going to throw open to the questions. We can see the questions coming flooding in, so thank you so much for sending those in. Please continue to send them in if you've got more questions. So our first question here is about why they should come to Macquarie. So why should a student pick Macquarie's Psychology Masters?
One of the things that I've worked at 3 different universities, I think the thing that I really love about Macquarie University is the fact that we really value good teaching and research. And so one of the great things that I think that we offer is when students come into the university, they're going to be taught by people who are also practicing or registered psychologists. So they really do understand what it's like to apply those skills in a real world experience. So from my perspective, one of the great things about being here is that scientist-practitioner link. And I think we do it here at Macquarie really well. That's one of the things I think differentiates us.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the kinds of programs that we offer are a little bit special too, aren't they? Because not many places actually offer organisational psychology or neuropsychology.
Absolutely. I mean, we're running the only program for organisational psychology in New South Wales, and clinical neuropsychology is only offered here in New South Wales as well. So we've got good opportunities for students to, realise that area of psychology that they want to grow into. So I feel very fortunate. We've got 4 different options to offer students as a master's courses.
Yeah, it's nice, and you can always come and talk to people here, and they can give you a bit of guidance about which of the master's programs is most suited to you and your interests.
Yeah.
Our next question is about the research component of the masters, so the research thesis, which we mentioned a little bit briefly previously, and whether students can choose what the topic is that they can take their thesis in.
That we've got so many different topics that are available for the thesis. If you're in an area of endorsement, then the people who'll be supervising your thesis will also be working in that area. So the thesis components are supervised by people with expertise in a particular, I'll give you an example. So in a clinical program, for example, Maria Kangas is an expert in post-traumatic stress disorder, and she supervises a large number of our PhD students in the clinical program. So those students who are particularly interested in working in post-traumatic stress disorder in the future will get the benefit of learning from her, but also doing some cutting edge research into the area as well. So Yeah, it's not like honours where you look down the list and you think, oh, well, I'll do that topic. This is really where you get to start to focus your energies on the area that's most of interest to you.
Yeah, and the place that you might want to work at once you finish your degree.
Yeah,
too.
absolutely.
So our next question is about pathways into organisational psychology, so whether students can study organisational psychology without an undergraduate degree.
Yeah, that's a question that we often get, and the answer is no in general. But we do have another course called the Business Psychology course, and there's a certificate and diploma in that program that will enable people to study organisational psychology, but not become an organisational psychologist, but to work alongside organisational psychologists and to learn about all the theories and the practice associated with those areas of interest. So that's typically someone who's maybe working in HR at the moment, hasn't done an undergraduate degree in psychology, has been working in training and development and wants to know some of the theory and the practice behind that so that they can improve the delivery of the service that they do within their own organisation.
And the reason that it's such a specific pathway to get to postgraduate psychology is because there is this Australian-wide accreditation body that makes sure that if you're going to call yourself a psychologist, you need to have very specific criteria and very specific qualifications to do that. And that's why not just anybody can jump straight into the master's programs. You need to have that foundational undergraduate and honours qualifications in order to get the required kind of understanding and perspective to be able to practice postgraduate psychology.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a very detailed pathway. And we are looking for the best students. We're looking for those students who've come in, they've done a great job of getting through their first 4 years, and then we want to take them to the next level and allow them to be able to specialise in an area that's of particular interest to them.
And that segues really nicely into another common question that we get, which is in terms of the applications for the master's programs, do we look more on the academic achievements of students or the practical experience?
Sure.
What is it specifically that we're looking for?
It sort of varies from program to program, really. So in the organisational psychology program, for example, they're not really looking for much work experience, but when it comes to selection, oh, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. I might have to have some water.
Sure.
Sorry.
So we're looking to see if students have this kind of specific qualifications or the specific experience that's relevant to that particular program.
Sure. So in organisational psychology, you don't need any specific experience, but it might help when you come to do that mini multiple interview process in terms of answering questions about case studies or previous experiences that you might have encountered. So it will help in that regard. With the clinical neuropsych program, no experience required there. Not too many opportunities to get a lot of experience in that area prior to coming to do a master's, but we do look for a better understanding about what sort of populations are you going to be working with, what sort of problems might you encounter, what sort of challenges will your clients have. So really understanding the population that you're going to be working with and the types of therapies and assessments to do with that area is really important. With the other two programs, professional psychology and clinical psychology, we're really looking for people who can demonstrate to us that they've had experience working with people before. That could be volunteer, it could be paid, it could be advocacy work, it could be counselling, it could be support, training, mentoring. Any of those things would be considered good experience for the clinical or the professional programs.
And it's often something that a lot of our undergraduate students think about too, is about what kind of experience they can get throughout their undergraduate degree to make themselves more competitive when they get to masters. And there's a heap of different volunteering opportunities available to students. There's lots of common things that students take that can really help them apply the things that they're learning in their degree in a real world or kind of job context.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so our next question is about clinical psychology. So the question is, if you can't get into clinical psychology, which of the other degrees would be the best choice?
Oh no, Michael, I hate that question. I hate it. I'll tell you why. Because the program that's best, that is the best, is the one that's the best one for you. Okay? So clinical psychology sometimes has been described as the golden ticket, but I've described it as not the only ticket. And certainly there are lots of other different areas of psychology, and if you go into clinical psychology, then you'll develop a certain skill set, but there's a different skill set that's required for delivery in org psych, and same with clinical neuropsychology. So from my perspective, I think really what you want to try to do is match your strengths to the areas of psychology that you want to be endorsed in. So I would say that all of the programs have their own merits, and not to consider any of the other programs as necessarily a backup plan. Do your research, figure out where you want to be, and just go for it.
Yeah, I think that's the thing to keep in mind, is that all the different areas of specialisation of psychology have quite different work. So the most important thing is working out what kind of work you want to do, what sort of skills you have, what kind of things you can demonstrate, and then picking the application that's the best suited for that.
Yeah.
Our next question is about the size of the intake, so how many students we take and whether we have quotas on our students.
Sure. We don't really have quotas. What sometimes will limit the number of students we take is just how many placements we can organise in a year. So we aim between 20 and 25 per program. So for each program between 20 and 25, and I'd say that's roughly the same for all the programs. We have about 22 students roughly in each class. So it's nice and small. There's not large numbers of students in big classrooms all the time. It's very much more run like tutorial style.
And the nice thing I think about having that size of cohort is that the students really get to know each other, and they develop this great kind of collaborative environment where they're all going through these experiences for the first time together. They really get to share the experiences and work together and support each other, and that's a really nice thing about having such a small group.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. And we take students from all around Australia, all different universities, and I'm always really pleased at the end of first semester, if I've got a guest lecturer in, I'll ask them if they can tell me that if they see any cliques in the class. You know, are there groups of Macquarie students huddled together, Western Sydney, Wollongong, Newcastle, and it's never the case. You know, the students are so beautifully integrated into class that there's no cliques. Everyone gets to know each other very quickly. We do a whole lot of exercises early in the program to help the students to get to know one another, so there's not that sort of distance between students within the class.
Yeah, it's a great camaraderie among the students.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, even during COVID, you know, and online, the same sort of thing applies. Students are chatting away to each other before the normal tutorial or lecture starts. It's been great.
Yeah, it's been a great opportunity for students to share in these unusual circumstances together. Our next question is about organisational psychology. So if you're interested in working in a big company instead of working in a clinic, how can they do that? What would be the path to working in a big company as an organisational psychologist? Sure.
So that's a great question, and most of our graduates would end up working in big organisations. They're either working for big consulting companies, or they're working for large employers, banks, insurance companies, etc. So we organise the placements. So the first placement you do is in the clinic, but it's in a clinic where we're looking at vocational counselling, vocational assessment. But for going forward from there, the other 3 placements that the students do is out in the real world. And in the real world, we have them working with some of these big consulting companies and organisations. So that gives them that sort of walk-up start to the opportunities that might present themselves at the end of the placement.
So the pathway to working there is to study the Master of Organisational Psychology, and that's going to give you a range of experiences relevant to that. Our next question is about getting a job after graduating. So how difficult or easy is it to get a job after graduating? It's always an important question.
Yeah, for sure. And look, I think our employability rates are exceptional. One of the things at the moment, of course, with COVID is there's been a huge increase in the need for mental health provision. And a lot of my students who work part-time are doing lots of extra hours at the moment, leading up into finishing their degree, because they're being employed as provisional psychologists as well. So I would say that employability is going to be excellent going forward. I think the demand for services in psychology is only going to increase just based on our current circumstances, but also I think the growing realisation of how important mental health is. I think we've seen a reorientation to try to make that much more of a priority than it's ever been before.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Our next question is about getting qualifications recognised overseas. So can their qualifications from Macquarie in Australia be recognised overseas?
Sure. It will depend on the country, to be honest. And one of the things that's important, I always say to students, is before you leave Australia, before you go overseas, make contact with the Australian Psychological Society and just see whether or not there's an exchange in place in terms of us recognising qualifications from overseas and overseas qualifications being recognised here. So very important before you step off to do your homework, make sure that you understand. It varies from country to country, to be honest.
Absolutely. It's a conversation I had with a couple of my students recently who are thinking of going overseas after they're graduating from here. So it's a very common thing to want to do. Next question is about into masters. So if a student can't make it into the master's degree in one particular year, can they try out again the next year?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes the students just maybe haven't haven't properly understood the opportunity presented to them, so they're not able to really answer the questions at the interview and the selection event very well. But they do go back, get some more experience and then come back. I've got 2 students in my class this year who came in for the second round. So they applied last year, didn't get in, and got in this year.
I think that's really common, particularly across the 4 different programs, because different programs, some of them are looking more for that academic excellence, some of them are looking more for that workplace experience. It's often really difficult to get that workplace experience when you've been studying so hard for so many years, so it's quite common for students to get through the 4 years of their undergraduate psychology degree and honours, go out into the workplace, get a bit more experience, and then come back and apply for masters later, and that can make themselves more competitive for the application.
Yeah, definitely, most definitely.
Our next question is about placements again. So can the students choose their own supervisor for the placement?
Right. Well, you know, it's not as easy as just picking up a supervisor. The supervisors need to be trained. They have to be trained through an APS approved program, upper approved program. So they have to do that first. They have to have been working for a minimum number of years before they can even do the training. So we make sure that we vet all of our supervisors, that they've got the right qualifications. It might be, though, that you know someone that's already a psychologist, or that you've got a family friend and you're wondering if they can be your supervisor. We absolutely do consider that, but we have a look at the qualifications that they've got and the experience and whether or not they meet that original criteria in order to be able to enable them to be qualified as your supervisor for any placement that you do.
Great. Okay, so thank you so much for everybody for asking all the questions. If you have any more questions, please feel free to keep putting them in the chat. We've got our student ambassadors, we've got academics who can answer those questions. We also have advising going on all day in the postgraduate session. If you have questions about psychology in more general, head over to the psychology and cognitive science area. We've got a couple more talks throughout the rest of the day today talking about undergraduate psychology. We also have a heap of documentation on the website where students can download the course informations for the different postgraduate programs. So please have a look at that if you're more interested in the specific details about the different programs. So Studio Central is live all day covering all things about Macquarie. So please check out Studio Central for the general Macquarie things and then the individual areas of study. Thank you so much, Jo, for having a chat with me today and for sharing with our students. And
I look forward to seeing everyone's applications in the future and meeting you.